In the summer of 1941, the Desert War in North Africa reached a dangerous pause after a British defeat that could not be explained away as bad luck. Operation Battleaxe had been meant to break through the Axis frontier defenses, defeat Rommel's armored forces, and relieve the besieged port of Tobruk. Instead, it ended with British tank units badly damaged, commanders frustrated, and the garrison still isolated behind Axis lines. This is where the road to Operation Crusader really begins, not with a fresh plan drawn on a clean map, but with the bitter memory of tanks burning in the desert and an army forced to admit that bravery and numbers were not enough.
Battleaxe followed an earlier, smaller effort called Brevity, which had also tested the Axis frontier and failed to produce a lasting result. The British problem was simple to state and hard to solve. Tobruk had to be relieved, but the route to Tobruk ran through a battlefield where distance, dust, enemy anti-tank guns, and German tactical skill could turn an advance into a trap. British leaders had not lacked courage or resources, but they had struggled to bring their infantry, tanks, artillery, and supply columns together at the right time and place. In Desert War, that failure was not a detail. It was the battle.
The western desert looked open, almost inviting to anyone studying it from above. There were no forests, no dense cities, and few rivers to channel movement. But the very openness of the desert created its own kind of danger, because formations could lose one another, supply columns could fall behind, and commanders could mistake movement for control. Tracks, ridges, escarpments, and fortified positions mattered enormously, yet much of the ground seemed empty until a unit suddenly ran into enemy fire. A tank force could move quickly across the desert, but speed without coordination often meant arriving first, alone and exposed.
Operation Battleaxe showed this problem clearly. British armored units attacked with confidence, and some of their infantry tanks were formidable machines when judged by protection alone. The Matilda infantry tank, heavily armored for its time, had already earned a reputation for being hard to kill. But armor was only one part of battlefield survival, and the Germans had learned how to blunt British tank attacks by drawing them toward prepared anti-tank guns and then using panzers to strike at the right moment. Tanks that looked powerful in isolation became vulnerable when they outran support, lost contact with friendly units, or entered killing zones without enough artillery preparation. The German and Italian defenders under Erwin Rommel had not simply waited to be pushed back. Rommel, already becoming a legend in the desert, understood the value of tempo and psychological pressure. He was aggressive, sometimes dangerously so, but he had a gift for making his opponents feel that the battlefield was slipping away faster than it really was. His forces used a combination of mobile armor, anti-tank guns, artillery, and defensive positions to force British units into costly decisions. The British often wanted a clean armored clash, but Rommel's method made that difficult by refusing to fight on British terms.
One of the harshest lessons after Battleaxe was that tank battles were not settled by tanks alone. British crews could be brave and determined, but a tank formation that lacked reliable communications, effective reconnaissance, and close coordination with artillery could not easily solve the problems in front of it. German units often used radios more effectively, allowing commanders to adjust faster during a fluid fight. British units, by contrast, could become separated by dust, distance, and uncertainty. Once formations lost the thread of the battle, individual tank crews might fight hard while the larger plan quietly fell apart around them.
The British also had to confront the limits of their own armored doctrine. Before the war, many armies had debated how tanks should be used, and Britain had developed different ideas around cruiser tanks, meant for speed and exploitation, and infantry tanks, meant to support foot soldiers through defended positions. In theory, this made sense. In practice, the desert did not always respect neat categories. A cruiser tank could be fast, but mechanically fragile, while an infantry tank could be tough, but too slow for the kind of sweeping maneuver commanders imagined. Battleaxe exposed the gap between theory, equipment, and battlefield reality.
Maintenance and recovery became just as important as gunnery and armor. In North Africa, a tank did not have to be destroyed by enemy fire to disappear from the order of battle. Engines overheated, tracks broke, dust entered machinery, and long moves consumed fuel at a punishing rate. A damaged tank that could not be recovered might be lost even if its crew survived. Workshops, spare parts, recovery vehicles, and fuel transport were not glamorous subjects, but they were central to desert armored warfare. Battleaxe reminded British commanders that an offensive could be defeated not only at the front line, but along the supply routes behind it.
There was also a command problem. Senior leaders needed to see the whole campaign, but the desert often gave them fragments, reports arriving late, sightings that were unclear, enemy movements that seemed to contradict one another, and units that were not where headquarters believed them to be. During Battleaxe, British command arrangements struggled under this pressure. Orders could be overtaken by events before they reached the formations expected to carry them out. Local commanders then had to make decisions with incomplete information, while higher headquarters tried to preserve a plan that the battlefield was already reshaping. In armored warfare, delay in understanding could be as damaging as delay in movement.
After Battleaxe, the consequences reached beyond the battlefield. General Archibald Wavell, the British commander in the Middle East, had carried a vast burden across a sprawling theater, but the failure to relieve Tobruk helped end his time in that role. He was replaced by General Claude Auchinleck, who inherited not just an operational problem, but a crisis of confidence. The British still had manpower, tanks, and industrial backing, but they had not yet found the method that would reliably beat Rommel in mobile battle. That distinction mattered. Having more equipment was useful, but using it well was the harder test.
The siege of Tobruk made every lesson more urgent. Tobruk was not merely a port on the Libyan coast. It was a symbol of resistance, a logistical prize, and a thorn in the Axis position. As long as the garrison held out, Rommel could not treat eastern Libya as fully secure, and the British could imagine returning westward. But each failed relief attempt increased the pressure. The men inside Tobruk endured bombardment, isolation, and uncertainty, while commanders outside the perimeter had to decide how much risk they were willing to take to reach them. Battleaxe proved that a direct armored push, poorly coordinated, would not be enough.
This is why Operation Crusader would have to be more than another try with fresh tank units. It would have to be a larger, more ambitious attempt to use armor, infantry, artillery, and mobile columns across a wide desert battlefield. The plan would need to account for frontier strongpoints, Rommel's panzers, the Tobruk garrison, the long supply lines from Egypt, and the danger of confusion once the fighting began. Yet the British were still learning under pressure, and learning in war is costly. Their commanders could study Battleaxe, identify mistakes, and issue new instructions, but no written lesson could guarantee calm judgment once dust, fear, and enemy movement returned.
After Battleaxe, British armor stood at a crossroads. It had shown courage, but not mastery, weight, but not coordination, movement, but not operational control. The defeat did not prove that tanks were useless in the desert. It proved that tanks used without proper combined arms integration could be wasted at terrible cost. That was the deeper significance of the failure. The desert was becoming a classroom for modern armored warfare, and the tuition was paid in machines, crews, and lost opportunities. Operation Crusader would emerge from that hard education, carrying both the hope of relieving Tobruk and the unresolved question of whether the British Army had learned enough, quickly enough,
to fight Rommel in a new way.